and kids grapple with things that they never get to express in school. And there's a power dynamic, right? There's a power dynamic that exists between a teacher and student. And I think we don't often, we in schools, we talk about good and bad and right and wrong, but we don't talk about power and control as much. And I think that's, to me, that relationship building, getting better at that relationship building part and humanizing students
I just
involves
think that more and more and more and more and more, even though we say it in terms of, like we said, growth mindset, but I think the other thing we say is we want to get kids to think, to be able to think, to be able to process. But I don't think that our practice does that. I think our practice is, I want them to think this.
I feel like this hyper focus on rules and accountability removes the creativity and the curiosity in kids. And like when I have kids that are studying for a test they have in another class, like I'll engage with them in a conversation about that class, about what they're learning in that class. Like I feel like a school environment would be better if teachers would do that.
Sometimes we can't do this in class, but they do one quick push-up, self-imposed. Our kids do one self-imposed push-up. Obviously, it's not a physical taxing. It's a reminder that their approach was wrong in their opinion. I never say it. I never point it out. But it's really cool to see random kids around a field doing one push-up.
They matter to us.
So,
and for me as a person, I know I dealt with a lot of self-consciousness and anxiety that consumed me through college, I think, and into my mid-20s, that I now reflect on had to do with a fear of vulnerability. Like I think I was afraid to share the things that mattered most to me with people that I wasn't afraid, or I wasn't sure how they'd receive, like maybe I looked up to and respected. And
I think there's less, I know this sounds strange, I think there's a lot less humanity in teaching now than there used to be.
To me, there is a big issue. We're talking about it because it is a very real thing that we need to do some things, change structurally in our education system to address. But I'm not sure we know what those things are yet, or I'm not sure our actions are consistent with what we're saying.
And I found this to be true. If you're addressing a team of boys and you're kind of calling them out for behavior or something like that, 17 teenage boys are all thinking to themselves, man, he's got your number. He gets you. Every single girl thinks you're talking to them. So it's like, it was really, really different. Like when I called them out as a team, I got 17 emails of apology from the girls, and the boys, I had to seek them out individually to make sure they knew I was actually talking to them.
Right. Like my analogy would be like, I know nothing about parenting, as no matter how many books that I've read, and I could read a whole library full of them and still be totally inept.
My most accomplished year as a coach, bar none. I was a full-time hitting coach at a Division I college, and I was also the head softball coach in high school at the same time for girls.
That was concurrent. I didn't realize those were at the same time. Okay.
Yeah, it was.
Was there more? Was coaching your son like at all? Did you have sort of the same type of thing where you were not only coaching him as a player, but like navigating your father-son relationship with him?
So if I'm vocal and animated after a loss, and happy and giddy and after a win, everything I said about process over outcome becomes less valuable.
So like,
right? Because I'm clearly.
Do you have a culture on your team where the kids will willingly confess the mistakes they made and they're open to the conversation? Do you feel like that's a hard thing for them to confront, or that's just sort of part of the team culture?
Right. So you want to be, singular minded and aggressive in your mindset. So we think of everything in terms of attack and not, and part of the growth mindset is we assess that approach later on. We don't assess the results.
We can talk about we assess the conversation. I'm curious about hitting
mindset,
the mental part of it. Like there's a lot of thinking that goes into hitting, but when you're on the plate, at the plate, you can overthink things, right?
Many people that can swing the bat really, really well can't hit it all. And vice versa. Some people that don't have a very beautiful swing that can hit.
All right. So I wanted to talk more about mindset. I wanted to talk about mental health, and I want to talk especially about hitting today. And I don't have as much of an agenda, so we can sort of free flow. But the story I figured I'd start off with was of mine as a player my senior year. I don't think I've ever told anybody this story, but it was, I don't know if you remember this game. We had a game against Dover Sherborne early in the year. Dover Sherborne was a team that we were accustomed to beating. It was a sloppy game. We were down probably like 13-12 late in the game. And kind of everybody else on our team had made some mistakes in the field by that point. And I remember when I was getting ready to come up to the plate, you pulled me aside and you gave me a one-on-one and you said, "Chuck, you're like the only one I have any confidence left in this team before," or something like that. "Just go out there and hit a home run." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. He has confidence in me." And I think I hit a ground ball to shortstop or something like that. But then the next time I got up, I was up with the bases loaded, and I think it was in the bottom of the 6th inning now. And I hit a fly ball to exactly where the right fielder was standing, but the right fielder rushed in on it. And so it went over his head. And then like 14 minutes later, I had rounded all the bases and they called it a home run. And then in the post-game speech, you said to the team, like, "I told Chuck to go up there and hit a home run. I didn't think he'd actually do it." And it was one of those things that I was like, even though I knew it was not my greatest athletic accomplishment, the way you personally reassured me before one of that at bats and the way you called me out in the post game speech made me feel real good. And I don't think I doubt you probably have any memory of that, but you always talk about the things that kids remember are different than the things that you remember. And that's why that occurred to me. I want to talk about hitting. Hitting is a very mental thing. As a coach, how do you approach hitting with your players?
Yeah. So I'm doing a hitting camp now, and I said to the kids last night, actually, that when they say they're taking hitting lessons from somebody, they're actually usually taking swinging lessons, right? So there's distinct swinging a bat and hitting. There are many, many people that can swing the bat really, really well. Can't hit it all, and vice versa. Some people that don't have a very beautiful swing that can hit. That's why I love it so much. And it analogizes to education a lot, where there's a lot of kids who aren't growing, aren't learning, but can get the requisite grade, while others, maybe pulling a C minus, C plus, B minus, but you can see the growth, and you can see it, translating to something down the road. I always, there's a famous football coach, Amos Alonzo Stagg, where they asked him how he thought the season went. And he said, "I'll let you know in 20 years. So I always like that. I think about that in terms of sports and education. I'll let you know in 20 years. I mean, how is this going to translate? And you're coming up on those 20 years, I guess, right? So, or you're beyond that. I can't, and I'm not good at math.
Actually, I do know this because it was the Lunar New Year. People say Chinese New Year. I had a friend who told me because he's Vietnamese, he prefers the term Lunar New Year. But that was this past Friday, and it was the year of the ox. And as we were this time 24 years ago, I think we were going into that senior baseball season of mine. So 24 years ago,
Wow.
was when, yeah.
So now you can be assessed.
Yeah.
And that's about the hitting thing. It's to be able to work on. That's why I'm so much more. I have such more of a positive view of coaching and the state of athletics, actually, which sounds sad, but then I do the state of education, because I think I think in education, we talk about a growth mindset, but in sports, I can absolutely um, help them live it and help myself live it. So it's much more of a growth mindset. It lends itself more. And hitting is a perfect example. We're constantly talking about process and, leaving your skills, your physical skills behind and going up there and now thinking about the situation and using whatever you bring to the table to the best of your advantage. Um, Not having to worry about where my elbow is or everything like that, to really make it a practical application of everything you've been working on. So um, we do much more regarding mental approach than we do physical. And I was asked by, I went to see a sports psychologist speak once, and he said, ask your kids what percent, given the fact that they're not going to get any better from the time they arrive at the field to the time they start doing something, ask them how much of their success that day depends on mental as opposed to physical. And he said, I would venture to guess they'll all say in the 80% range or more. So I immediately came home and asked my two sons separately, hey, what do you think your success? And both of them said 80% at separate occasions. And then his whole contention was, how much of your practice is devoted to physical as opposed to mental? And it's usually reversed. So we've reversed it. We do way more on the mental than I do the physical. So, and obviously it depends. If you have kids who are holding the wrong end of the bat, you really got to focus a little on the physical initially. But so
Right.
mindset is everything.
So I was thinking how when you talked about the growth mindset and like the things we do in education a lot, I feel the same thing that I think I heard you say, which is that we talk about things, but we're like in baseball and in sports in general, I don't think you have the luxury of not being confronted when you're talking about things and not doing them. Like you're going to fail on the field or on the court in ways that school environment controls certain things, I think. But I think that's a good conversation later on, like part we could talk about later on in the conversation. That I'm curious about hitting mindset, the mental part of it. Like there's a lot of thinking that goes into hitting, but when you're on the plate, you can overthink things, right? So
You
how
can
do you
overthink the things.
So how do you approach that mindset where you want to be like, I would consider hitting as you're thinking. As soon as you step in that batter's box, you stop thinking and you start reacting. But maybe it's been a while since I've done it.
Yeah, well, it's been a while since, and there's been vast changes in how I teach it since I coached you. So it's not that you're not thinking; you have to be thinking about the appropriate things, the situation, the pitcher, what he's trying to do, what you're trying to do, and then try to bring it down to a singular aggressive thought, right? So you want to be singular minded and aggressive in your mindset. So we think of everything in terms of attack and not and part of the growth mindset is we assess that approach later on. We don't assess the results, right? We assess the approach. So what were you thinking? I don't ever talk to the kids anymore about why are you swinging at that? What are you doing there? What are you doing there? It's always questioning, what were you thinking? What were you looking for there? Would you do it the same the next time? And have them process it and try to look at every single at bat as growth. Knowing that with the cliche that you're going to fail more than you succeed, to look at it as an approach. So we talk a ton about count. We're thinking a lot about count and where we are. We're looking at a particular zone to attack. Anything comes in our zone, We approach everything off the fastball. I always say, I said this last night, if you can't hit the fastball, buy a lacrosse stick, because it all really comes from that. You know, we try to create a culture where all of our kids are hitting coaches for each other, and we take pride in nobody can throw a fastball by us that we're looking for, and know when to tip your cap to the opponent for being just a little bit better than you in that time. So it's really, I use hitting, and the approach to hitting as my number one kind of teaching tool, because all of my kids are involved in it. They're all invested in everybody's at bat, a lot of communication, not mindless chatter, but a lot of talking, a lot of questioning on the bench, a lot of, preparation, different stages, sitting on the bench and not even paying attention to being in the hole, being on deck, and the process they're going through there. And it's really, it's neat. It's exciting, actually.
That's cool. Yeah, it does have make me think about my teaching, and specifically this year, a lot, because I've told myself this year I'm going to make mistakes, and the problem is if I'm not making mistakes when the whole environment's changed. How do you do you have a culture on your team where the kids will willingly confess the mistakes they made and they're open to the conversation? Do you feel like that's a hard thing for them to confront, or that's just sort of part of the team culture?
Yeah, that's, the culture's fantastic. And they, some kids are a little bit more emotional than other kids, but when we define the success, right? So we define, what the success is. So it's really, really good I have to know when to, my job as a coach is when to question, when to let the kid just go off and think about it and come back, when to give them a little tap. And I'll never have any negative interaction with a kid after an at bat, unless there was some sort of behavioral thing. The only thing, I ask my coaching staff to confront is behavior. So anything that would be viewed as, negative body language or demeaning to somebody else or something like that. But, if a kid's visibly upset, we'll talk about how that's, how to channel it a little bit better. But it's definitely a culture, and they're definitely open to assessing their performance themselves. The issue is you can't, trying to create an atmosphere where you have 20 games and kids are not living and dying on every at bat, or thinking that their playing time rides on that at bat, which is hard, because if they're terrible in terms of performance, it probably is to a certain extent riding on it. But that's why I have to sometimes back up my teaching with the fact that if I have you on this team, you're gonna play, right? You're gonna play at some point, and really defining your role when you're not playing. They all have a role. Every kid has a role. And it should be a role that's celebrated, not just said in the moment to as an excuse as to why I don't play you, because you're not good at the sport, right? So it has to be celebrated. We're very, very conscious of pointing out, maybe I wasn't when you were there, certainly wasn't when you played, but pointing out the chasing of the foul balls, pointing out the accuracy of the pitching charts that one kid is hitting, pointing out how when our kid is doing the book and I'm looking for information, they're there, pointing out body language and warming up the left fielder, are things that are much more common for me to point out post game. I do very, very little talking after a loss, and a lot more critiquing after a win by design. Um,
Interesting.
Only to try to um, reinforce what I'm teaching them. So if I'm vocal and animated after a loss, and happy and giddy and after a win, everything I said about process over outcome becomes less valuable, right? Because I'm clearly evaluating my mood based on the final score, which is a bad message, I think. It's
Yeah,
the
you're
same
paying
thing.
it.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say you're paying attention to aligning the implicit message with the explicit message, which I think is the thing that we overlook often. Um, I would think, I haven't done that much coaching. The little bit of coaching I've done and playing, like what I remember, like I would think your worst player is much better at admitting their mistakes than your best player, and I would think it's sort of like your worst player is almost like what I do wrong, wants to be coached, and your best player sometimes by nature or isn't used to being coached as much. But for that whole culture to coalesce, you need those best players to really be models, those best hitters, right? Do you put special attention into developing those skills in them, or am I kind of making that up in my head? That dynamic?
No, but it's just different skill development. So for my best players, you know, I just did a hitting camp last night, so I got all these cliches in my head. So what I asked the kids who knew Mike Trout, and they all know Mike Trout. He's the best player in baseball, perhaps. And I said, Mike Trout has a hitting coach. You know what I mean? I don't know. I said Picasso had an art teacher. I don't know if that's true or not, but I said if Mike Trout could have a hitting coach, you definitely could have a hitting coach. And you can improve. So what I'm looking for is for my best players to learn how to lead and learn how to not be perfect. Learn how to not feel they need to be perfect, right? Um, I had that balance was most difficult with my son because um, I want him to fail. I want him to grow through the failure. He's also our best player, so I needed him to succeed, but not feel that he's letting people down. So it all just circles back to addressing the attitude and the effort and not the result constantly. Constantly going back to addressing attitude and effort. The issue with it, and it's very similar to the classroom or parenting. The issue is you can make 99 correct assessments. You can make 99 correct motivational talks or commentary. It's the one inconsistency that an athlete or a student might latch onto, right? So I've been telling you it's not about the result, it's about the process. It's not about your grade, it's about your energy, your participation, your contributions. And then I chastise the result. A lot of work just went out the window. But we're human, right? And on the field, I want to win. I've never been on the field and not wanted to win. I control it better now, but you can do a lot of damage, much more damage than good with one comment. And that's hard. That's unfortunate, but I think it's true.
I think so too. I was thinking of this when I thought of taking risks. Like, there's a lot of things I want to be when I design a lesson. I want to, whatever taking risks means. For me, it just means kind of like if I'm like, oh no, I don't want to do that because I have ways that I already like trying that is taking a risk. Like we by nature try to do, like we resist change, and we're no different than anyone else. but taking risks, like there's the part I don't take any risks in is like when I'm talking to the whole class and trying to get people to laugh, like I kind of know where I can go to get people to laugh, and like certain things I'm very cautious about because I don't want to do that, like offend someone personally. And actually, I think a lot of that, who I am in those moments is what I learned from observing you too. Making jokes where either I'm the joke or the joke is the society or the culture in general, but not making personal jokes kind of thing. I was thinking also, the couple of things that I was thinking, number one is Picasso's coach must have told him to make more cubes. And that's all I imagine him telling him. Playing for my dad, I think was the coach that everybody else wanted to play for, but I didn't like playing for him because he was the only guy that sat me. And so I felt like there was like the inverse, like I wouldn't say he overcoached me, but he sat me to make sure that I knew that I was just like every other player. And I was like, yeah, but every other coach, just like they only sit a couple guys every game.
Yeah.
Was there more, was coaching your son like at all? Did you have sort of the same type of thing where you're not only coaching him as a player, but like navigating your father-son relationship with him?
Yeah, it was. I was harder on him. I didn't mince words with him nearly the way I mince them with other kids. I also had him in class, which I would say was more difficult because he's observed me as a coach his whole life. He's known exactly how I evolved as a coach, but he'd never seen me in class, and that was more awkward. Because it's a completely different dynamic, right? With teaching being infinitely harder because it's they're not there voluntarily, which is a huge aspect of it. They have a huge, vast discrepancy or disparity in their interest level in the subject and their ability, where those gaps are really much smaller in sports, right? They all have some sort of basic competency. I got a water delivery here.
All right. Got to stay hydrated.
Yeah.
Well, you got a straw?
I don't know why I haven't used the straw in 20 years. I don't know why she put that in, but I don't know.
Okay.
So, yeah, so in class was more awkward because it's, like I said, the mixed gender and all that is different. It's a different dynamic, and so I was a little bit more nervous having him in class than I was, in the field, on the field. So.
That raises another tangential question I have that I was thinking about because I'm now up spending time with my brother and sister and their two sons who are 4 and 6, I think. They're my nephews. And I often think, because I have a lot of experience in the classroom, that I kind of have good behavior management, or I know what age appropriate modeling is, but I also don't have any experience as a parent. And so then that kind of, the whole what percentage of hitting is mental versus what part is physical made me think of, like, I think that, number one, I wonder if 80%, when we say 80% something, is that influenced by our school's grading scale? Because 80% is kind of like the safe number. So it's the first number that comes to mind. And also, this is what I think school does, is we sort of learn that all learning is knowledge based, or like stuff that you can read out of a book, and we underestimate the amount that's experiential. Where my analogy would be like, I know nothing about parenting, as no matter how many books that I've read, and I could read a whole library full of them and still be totally inept.
Yeah.
I would be curious to hear more about your career. Like the last we talked about your career you kind of like nonchalantly, yeah, so we won a state championship, and like then after that you moved on to be a hitting coach at Holy Cross, is that right?
Hmm. Yeah. So my thinking was in 2000, I had been asked by several colleges to if whether I wanted to come as a hitting coach or anything like that, and things like that. And I don't know. I didn't know whether I wanted to scratch that itch or not. And I had kind of decided I was going to do that. I was going to go to Holy Cross, and I kind of gave a verbal um, commitment to go there at the end of the 2004 season. But then we won the state championship, and I thought that that would have sent a really bad message. So I sent another really bad message. I went back on my word with Holy Cross and said I can't leave. Um, so I stayed another year, and I said, I just need another year. And then it was 2005, and we went into the state tournament ranked #1 in the state. So I had this dueling thoughts. I'm thinking, well, I got to do whatever I can to not win another state championship because I'm leaving, and I don't want to leave. Um, I don't want there to be any association with been there, done that, and I'm heading off. Because even if one kid gets that message, not a really good thing to impart. So fortunately, we ran into a player who ended up playing for the Oakland A's and Duke University. So our run to another state title ended abruptly. And then I went off to Holy Cross to do that. And I stayed there a couple of years. And actually during my second year was my most accomplished year as a coach, bar none. I was a full-time hitting coach at a Division I college, and I was also the head softball coach in high school at the same time for girls.
That was concurrent. I didn't realize those were at the same time. Okay.
Yeah, it was that's one of those things where when I tell the story now, I have to go back and look, because I said that couldn't have been true. I couldn't have done that, but I did that. And it was a 1-year deal to do the softball team. And I enjoyed it so much, I ended up leaving Holy Cross and doing softball for 5 years. So my 1 year turned into 5, and my new career as a college baseball coach turned into 2. And I left
2,
that.
okay.
Yeah.
So were you coaching both for 2 years, or you were coaching baseball for?
I coached a year at Holy Cross,
And then the second year?
and I had two of my students who played softball. It was a really funny story. 2 of my students who played softball, I don't remember exactly the scenario, other than the fact that they didn't have a coach for whatever reason. And they came in and they said, "We heard you used to coach." And I'm like, "Yeah, I used to coach. I still coach. I just don't coach here." And they said, "Oh, we were wondering if you would be interested in coaching our softball team. Somebody told us to ask you." So I said, "Well, I don't know anything about softball, and but I would love to try that, but I'm coaching baseball at Holy Cross." And they kind of left my room as though I was like the 14th person they had asked and been rejected. So when they left, I was like, "Oh, I would love to be able to say I could do that and help them out." So I actually got out the high school. Sorry, my computer's going crazy. I actually got out the high school softball schedule and the Holy Cross schedule, and I matched them up and I wrote them all down. And I went to the athletic director and said, I could do this if the girls are willing to practice at night indoors and early in the morning on weekends. And because all my games are on the weekend and I could travel, and all their games are, and I did them both. So I actually had one where I coached Hopkinton at Medfield softball and had my assistant coach take the girls back on the bus, and I drove directly to North Carolina for a 4-game set at University of North Carolina. So I did them both. I enjoyed the softball so much that I stayed for 5 years.
Did that kind of confirm that teenager, like the 15 to 18-year-old is the type of young adult that you want to be working with, or was it?
No, I like the age group. I like the college as well. I just I wasn't afforded the amount of time because I was still teaching, I didn't have the amount of time, and I wasn't the head coach. I'm not as good as an assistant coach, because for me, it was more, at Holy Cross was more about baseball. I was given complete latitude to run the defense and to run the hitters and help run the game but it was all baseball, and I was not able to kind of establish a culture. I had high respect for the person I was working with, but the culture wasn't mine. I couldn't help create it. So if I had great ideas or what I thought were great ideas, I couldn't really implement them. So I felt like I had more impact in high school. And you see the kids during the day. So I know my kids' grades. I know their relationships with teachers. I have that contact every day. Plus the dynamic of coaching girls was really, really different and really, really enjoyable. To the point where I thought I might stay, but then I had the itch. I think I enjoyed coaching girls as much, if not more, but I enjoyed baseball more than softball. So the combination, really different coaching girls. It was fascinatingly different.
Interesting. I would like to, I always feel like I'd like to have that experience. I also felt like I played softball a lot of times after college, like on these slow pitch teams.
Yeah.
And I was like, I hate this game. Like I wanted the ball to be coming at me fast. And these guys that could hit it way further than me, I was always angry at them because I was like, can they hit a curveball though?
Well, this was fast pitch softball. So.
That's true. Yeah. So I probably I would have no reservations with coaching softball then. Fast pitch softball.
The dynamic is interesting, and somebody had warned me of this, and I found it to be true. If you're addressing a team of boys and you're kind of calling them out for behavior or something like that, 17 teenage boys are all thinking to themselves, man, he's got your number. He gets you. Every single girl thinks you're talking to them. So it's like, it was really, really different. Like when I called them out as a team, I got 17 emails of apology from the girls, and the boys, I had to seek them out individually to make sure they knew I was actually talking to them. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Really, I had never thought of that.
So.
I was curious about, I read a little bit up on your Gene Burns character from Wikipedia. So I'll share that he's from Hornell, New York. He started out at a radio station in Baltimore and spent a year in Vietnam in 1968 and a year in the Middle East in 1969 as a radio host. And then he went to Boston for WKRO for 8 years. And then this is what I thought was interesting. He ended up in San Francisco, where he made his career. In the twilight of his career was a radio show about wine and fine dining. So I feel like that's like once a band has already kind of made their big albums and they settle into playing the summer concerts for their big time fans and they play the hits. Like, yep. I think that's what he did as a radio host. I don't want to hear more about him. I want to hear more about your high school coach, because clearly he was you've talked about him a couple of times. Like, is he the one that you learned to establish this culture that you aspire to, or am I
Um,
wrong in saying that he was a major influence on your life?
oh, huge. Yeah. Yeah. And still very close. Texted him this week. Yeah, he was other, like I said, probably other than my brother, or in addition to my brother, he was probably the single, or among two or three of my biggest role models in my life. He just had a great feel, but it was really, really different. Like he has, I think, 14 grandkids now, and he's constantly calling me up. He's constantly calling me up and asking me if I'll work with them, or what I think about this and hitting, and how I would teach that, and regarding baseball or whatever. And he's a Hall of Fame coach in two sports, and he's asking me. And I said, "Why are you asking me?" He goes, "You know, I have no idea what I was doing," because he was all about motivation. He was all about relationships, and that's basically what it was back then. It was a lot less technical. I got no technical advice when I played. It was all about competing, and if you weren't good enough to compete, then you would just get cut or not play. So it was a little bit more, a lot less about culture and things like that. He just had a way about making you feel important, um, but he could do it through joking. He could do it through screaming. He could do it through a hug, but just had a knack for knowing which tool to pull out of the toolbox. You would come in thinking you're going to get screamed at, and he'd be there to lift you up. You'd get maybe a little bit too arrogant with your performance, and he'd be there to lower you a little bit. He just knew how to. I don't know if all the kids felt that way. I know a vast majority do, because he's legendary. But for me, he just always knew how to pull the right strings, and he's still very active in my life. His wife and my son are pen pals in French. And whenever something happens with my son at college, I'll constantly talk to him about it. But a very different style. But one of the things is, he told me, and the athletic director, who was a peer of his in high school when I was getting into coaching, said the number one piece of advice, and I still impart this on young coaches, is coach your personality. Don't try to be me, right? And that's really kind of important. Like, Jay Golden has coached for me or with me for years and years and years. And we have some similarities of personality, but we're really different. Coach Vera and I are completely different personalities. But we learn from each other. But you can emulate, but don't imitate, and with him, I didn't have his, like I like to say, I didn't have his presence. He had a presence about him. But I have some skills he didn't have. So, but he was definitely influential.
I still remember when I was probably about 8 or so years out of high school that I told you I was going to start teaching, and I still remember the two pieces of advice you gave me, which was teach to your own personality and have as many one-on-one conversations as possible. And those are things that I still, they're like lifelong, they're good lifelong goals, because I got to keep working at them, but they guide my practice. And I think one of the things that I definitely learned from you, I think a lot of the learning we do, like, we over rationalize things, like we act like we did things because this and that, but that's not how the brain works. Like, you feel things, and then you go back and try to understand why you feel them. But I had learned as a student from my positive and negative experiences. You said that in an earlier interview, and I think I had negative experiences sometimes as a student, because I was a little bit of a button pusher. I think I had ADD. I didn't, I did do well on tests usually, but I didn't do well um, meeting the teacher's expectations. And I had several of them kind of call me out in front of the whole class. And I remember times when I felt belittled a little bit, and I deserved it. I didn't appreciate how hard I was to manage until I started teaching. But I do remember you as a coach, like you would take that tone to me, like, but it was like when you were talking to me one-on-one, because I didn't throw a curveball when the catcher called for it, or I shook him off, or like I didn't steal a base because I was afraid of getting caught stealing. Like I remember you would handle the direct confrontation individually. And I think that's kind of one of the things that I aspire to do as a teacher. Like if I have critical feedback to a student, I need to take them out of the classroom, and I need to handle that in a one-on-one situation. And um, and I think this is my way of bridging to, we talk about mental health a lot as a district. I don't know if Hopkinton, I imagine Hopkinton talks about mental health. Mental health is a term that's very common in our culture today. We talked earlier about how sometimes, like the growth mindset, like we may say one thing and do another. I want to talk a little bit about mental health, and is there, to me, there is a big issue. We're talking about it because it is a very real thing that we need to do some things, change structurally in our education system to address. But I'm not sure we know what those things are yet, or I'm not sure our actions are consistent with what we're saying. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, well, I think there's tremendous flaws in this educational system that we want to help kids with their mental health. I want to help myself with my mental health. But we have a system. I think we have a system in place that doesn't lend itself to it very well. It's, again, it's a little hard. Circling back to what you said, like praise publicly and critique or criticize privately is important. It's also really hard to do in a public school setting, right? And understanding that teachers are human beings that get aggravated, come into school with their own sets of problems and emotional stress and all that stuff. So I think a lot of it is this, we have such, even though we say it on paper, we say it differently. We have such expectations of perfection that are unrealistic, right? And I think there's less, I know this sounds strange, I think there's a lot less humanity in teaching now than there used to be. And that sounds weird because we fancy ourselves as diverse and open-minded and empathetic and all this stuff, but that's not what I mean by the humanity. I mean, you see less of people's personalities because we're so ultra conscious about everything we say. We're so willing to catch people doing things wrong and not right that it leads to additional stress levels, right? And kids are incredibly observant. So, more personable kids lend themselves to more one-on-one conversations with teachers. More personable kids lend themselves with more interaction during the class time with kids, and the quieter kids are observing that and can internalize it as, well, he likes her more than he likes me, or she likes him more than she likes me. Engages with them more. So there's so many dynamics that are happening, right? And we understand it and we try to overcome that. But the problem is you're working within a system, especially in a school system like yours or mine, where they have an end goal. Their end goal is this college thing, right? And there's a scoreboard. And those scoreboards are harmful, right? They're really harmful because I was mentioning this a couple of weeks ago to you, I think, about the piece of paper that colleges see and the applications and the letters that colleges see do not reflect the kids in total. And I could definitely recommend to colleges that this young man or this young woman would do wonders for your campus. You accepted this one and rejected this one, but this person, this whole person would do wonders. But they didn't achieve on the scoreboard the way the other one did. And how do you then preach growth mindset and give them a score, an arbitrary score? You're saying one thing and you're battling within a system that values other things. It's very complicated. I don't even know if I made any sense there, but
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. The things that I'm thinking are like, I've talked a little bit about, I spent 8 years teaching in Oakland and San Francisco, and now this is my 5th year in Pleasanton. So those are very different. I put Oakland and lump Oakland and San Francisco, the schools I taught at, into a different category. There's a bit of a wall that divides those communities. The needs of the students are very different, and the access to resources and opportunities are very different. So I think we have marching band, we have a water polo team, we have all these, we have a debate team like in Pleasanton that the kids in Oakland and San Francisco don't have. We didn't talk about mental health that much. Although kids deal with crises, and I don't want to speak for them because I didn't grow up like that, but I think a lot of their struggles are feeling like the system dismisses them, or feeling like they're growing up in an environment that doesn't really want them to succeed, or maybe gives them mixed messages. And then I see what I see as a reaction to that is teachers who have really valued relationship building in those schools, whereas at the school I'm at now, we overlook the value of relationship building. I think we tend to, I think why the system does what it does is because we want to blame individuals. And so it could be easy to blame teachers for not being good at relationship building in wealthy school districts. But really it's the system. I think that it's the college admission systems. I think that like it sort of, in my opinion, puts pressure on us to see our kids as statistics. So, we get data, test scores and this kind of thing, or like if the kid doesn't do our homework, we have a way of making kids feel good as long as they're doing things that make our job easier. And that's where I kind of see a little bit of this. Like we turn kids apart from human beings and kids with emotional experiences into devices to retain the content that we're teaching. That's where I feel like there's a problem. That's where I would go to with the overarching mental health theme, is that as a system, we're not implicitly showing kids that they matter to us. And for me as a person, I know I dealt with a lot of self-consciousness and anxiety that consumed me through college, I think, and into my mid-20s, that I now reflect on had to do with a fear of vulnerability. Like I think I was afraid to share the things that mattered most to me with people that I wasn't afraid, or I wasn't sure how they'd receive, like maybe I looked up to and respected. And I guess I think as a culture, we have a fear of vulnerability. And that's where to me, that's where that would be an interesting place to start addressing some of these mental health things.
Yeah, because we got prescribed success. Like we're told what success is, right? And I've always to link it to sports, where the kids want to be there. Generally speaking, that's changed a little bit, but they want to be there. We can practice without any fear of failure. So I'm constantly saying, embrace the failure, and have kids sometimes we can't do this in class, but they do one quick push-up, self-imposed. Our kids do one self-imposed push-up. Obviously, it's not a physical taxing. It's a reminder that their approach was wrong in their opinion. I never say it, I never point it out, but it's really cool to see random kids around a field doing one push-up. So I'll have a kid just all of a sudden do a push-up, and I'll curiously say to him later on, "Why'd you do that push-up out there? The ball wasn't even hit to you." He goes, "I was wandering, I was daydreaming," or something like that. Or a kid makes a play and does a push-up. He said, "Yeah, I had my eyes closed. I got the bad hop," or something like that. But it was a self-assessment and reflection, right? Whereas in the classroom, you can't necessarily self-reflect, right? And there's kids that absolutely have zero interest in being there. They have no desire to be there. And if that's the case, teachers are going to be more drawn to the other kids who share a passion. And then there you go again. You're kind of reinforcing their vulnerability. You're reinforcing, I don't like this. He doesn't like me. I'm not good at this. And it's just a cycle that keeps on going. I do something in class called Meet the Press, where I have 4 kids volunteer and I just drill them with questions. But there's no fact-based questions. It's all personal. Favorite color, who would you most like to have lunch with? What do you fear most? And they could pass on anything they want. But always I say, give me advice as a teacher. Give public schools, what are we doing wrong? The most common answer by a sizable margin is teachers need to realize that their class is not the most important thing in my life. That's the most common answer I get.
Wait. It's not the lunch. They don't say it. They don't talk about the lunch.
They don't. They say math is the most important thing in their life. So,
well, that's understood.
But that's the one message they want to say, that this is not the most important thing in their life, and that sometimes that they extrapolate on. They say, I'm not refraining from doing people's homework because I'm being a rebel without a cause. I just had no interest in it, or my aunt was in the hospital, and I made an assessment. And when we think about, like, I don't ever come into practice and say, "Hey, did you take 25 swings in your basement yesterday?" Right? I just know that my kids are looking for ways to enhance themselves, where that should be our goal in the classroom. Like, I want a success for me is when a kid comes in and says, "No, Mr. Simoes, I read this article on gerrymandering. It was really interesting. I thought you might like to share it." That to me is a success, that they went and they found an article, that they care about learning.
Yeah, and I think that really needs to be our focused goal. I feel like this hyper focus on rules and accountability removes the creativity and the curiosity in kids. And like when I have kids that are studying for a test they have in another class, like I'll engage with them in a conversation about that class, about what they're learning in that class. Like I feel like a school environment would be better if teachers would do that. But there's pressure, right? There's pressure, and I know that part of those risks that I was talking about before are departing from the pacing guide when I don't feel like the pacing guide is in my students' best interest, or that kid that you're talking about that like disengages from you. A lot of times I have felt like, do I go closer? Do I stay? Do I give them their space? Like, how do you deal with that kid? And I've kind of gotten to the point where I really do. Those are the kids that I focus on. I can't shine a spotlight on them, right? Those kids need to be like, know that I'm aware of them and focus on them, but also kind of not drawing attention to them. but I think these are the systemic things that manifest themselves. I feel like in me personally, it's like it's a lot of times easier to do the wrong, like to follow the pacing guide to a T, and to sort of like ignore that kid are things that are easier to do a lot of times than and as a culture, I think we're afraid of confrontation, right? And I think that um a lot of these things are communication, like they're people want to address these issues with big scale structural changes, and to me they're smaller scale issues of communication, self-reflection. um
And just the practical nature of it, where I'll have, I had somebody ask me the other day, do you find it difficult when your kids come in playing baseball and you're teaching them something about hitting, or, but they have their own hitting coach and it's conflicting? And I go, no, I don't find it, it's a little bit of a challenge, right? But it's the same sport and there's probably find some commonality. But you think about your students, you're 1/6 of their adult influence in the course of a day. You're 1/6. You range somewhere on their hierarchy of like, in terms of subject and personality. Um, the subject matters are completely different, and the people are completely different. So they're getting bombarded with, and I guess that's life, but it's not really life, right? It's not really life where you go, how many times in your, when you're an employer, you have you have your boss and you have your peers, and there's a consistency to it. They're getting bombarded with all kinds of different messaging from all sorts of adults. And that's a lot of pressure, right? Because I'm pretty certain that I'm not imparting the same kind of message as my colleagues. And that I can't go too far into this because that's that taboo, dangerous area. But I think that's part of the pressure, where teachers want to get out their opinions. Teachers want to get out their viewpoints because they think they're valuable. But we really, to a certain extent, we shouldn't. And then when you do, you're putting kids in a really awkward position. Because I just think that more and more and more and more and more, even though we say it in terms of, like we said, growth mindset, but I think the other thing we say is we want to get kids to think, to be able to think, to be able to process. But I don't think that our practice does that. I think our practice is, I want them to think this.
yeah, we want them to retain, and I don't think we really want to create the environment where they feel safe expressing themselves, and that's hard to do. But this is where I think, like, I think there's part of this, like, race and identity do sort of play a part in the whole mental health conversation. Is I think that we live in a world where so much changed in the last 20, 30, 40 years. Like, kids are kind of coming to terms with who they are, and whatever they're like, the stereotype exists for that type of personality. And I don't think, and our education system gives them enough time to process that. And like what you're saying is, I don't think we want to come across being like projecting our opinions on them. Like, we want to be very careful if it is something that is our opinion, but we still want to give them a space to sort of be critical and be reflective. And I think, in my opinion, like we it's easier to go to this space where it's all content driven. It's very easy to measure with an end of the chapter test, and kids grapple with things that they never get to express in school. And there's a power dynamic, right? There's a power dynamic that exists between a teacher and student. And I think we don't often, we in schools, we talk about good and bad and right and wrong, but we don't talk about power and control as much. And I think that's, to me, that relationship building, getting better at that relationship building part and humanizing students involves unpacking about, involves talking about like the sort of the power dynamics that are involved with the relationship building, I think.
Yeah, and anytime anything is discussed in sound bites, it's not as valuable. And you're constrained by a clock. You know, an important topic comes up with 2 minutes left in class. That creates problems because a lot of times you can't close the loop on what you might have been talking about. You know, I have conversations with adults that, you know, when you got to hang up the phone, I'm like, he has no clue where I was going with that, right? And certainly you got 30 or 20 impressionable young people that are probably leaving with a completely different thought. It's hard because if you don't give it the time, you could be doing a disservice, and there simply isn't the time, you know, which is a complaint among faculty as well. We use the cliche, we need to be able to have difficult conversations. So we had a training the other day about difficult conversations. It was an entire faculty on a Zoom for 1 hour. Really? 110 people on a Zoom with one person talking for an hour. That's not a difficult conversation. It was an exercise in frustration because I couldn't, unless you're going to dominate. You think about how we could, if we allowed this to go, and we could talk for 17 hours and still not really fully express what we think about really important issues. Now you got 110 faculty members on a television screen and only 3 have spoken. I don't know why we don't have public debates among our faculty. Well, why not? You know, I've been pushing for that for years, where we do a point counterpoint, kind of a TV talk show or radio talk show, where we pick 2 or 3 current issues and go point counterpoint, because you can show, if you choose the people wisely. And I have a colleague that he and I disagree probably on a lot of things, but we're really we have great very long, in-depth conversations. We get each other to think. We could model civility. We could model, you know, how to debate, and we could model affirming something you didn't originally agree with, and it would be fairly easy. I don't know why we don't. And I could probably get 300 kids to sign up for that class. You know.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That definitely, I think I mentioned this in the last interview, that I set up a page at tiny.cc/Snyder Simoes because I wanted to invite other people into the conversation. Mm-hmm. So it would be fun to try to do a point counterpoint, because I agree with you. Like people that are comfortable talking about divisive topics and do it in a way that validates the opposition and it challenges them, sort of need to make themselves models a little bit. And we also do this courageous conversations. I have a long history with those because we started those. The guy who wrote the book that's made that term popular, like, delivered the training in my classroom in Oakland, and now we're doing it in Pleasanton, but they're had in a much different way. I think educators need better models of these conversations that really are, that get to the point, or maybe dance around the point sometimes too. But I was thinking how the YouTube will tell you how many views you have, but the statistic that I'm more interested in is what percentage of those viewers make it to the end. So I dropped the link at the end to see how many people actually get there. If they wanted to give us topics to do kind of point counterpoint, do you think we could do something like that?
Sure. Yeah, I can do anything. I like talking. I like thinking. Um, Prior to coming here, I just drove. I go out and get my coffee and I listen to podcasts. Today's was 2 hours long, and I had to. So I wasted a full tank of gas, and I had to keep pulling over and rewinding um, to hear, to try to understand. They're two really brilliant speakers. Um, but after all that, I have more questions than answers. And that was listening to two people talk for 2 solid hours, right? And we think we're getting news from um, a 30-second soundbite on a politics show. You know, there's so much more you can make. You can make it. If the other person doesn't have a chance to refute with meaning, you can make anything sound wonderful.
Especially when you have like numbers scrolling across the bottom of the screen and all sorts of lights flashing at you. Yeah.
When I proposed that, you talk about another fatal flaw of education. When I proposed that talk show class for the first time, the very first question I got was, how are you going to assess them? Right?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to assess them? I'm like, I don't know, I'll give them B's. Uh, I'll give them an A. I don't know. You tell me how I'm going to assess them. Like, to me, it would be an ongoing assessment. I was thinking after, you and I make a point counterpoint, and then we open up the floor, right? To anybody that wants to ask questions. Well, that's part of your assessment, right? You ask a question or you give a thoughtful reply. Well, what about the quiet kid? I don't know. We assess him on the quality of his sweater. I don't know, but it wouldn't be something I would concern myself with.
It's
Like
a little bit.
there might be 15 kids that slide through and get a good grade in an easy course. Oh well, I don't think we did them any harm. We probably engaged them. Um, so
It's a little bit like if you and I were to start this by going, how are we going to monetize this? Right. That like, and then I'm not trying to monetize this. That's not the first question I'm asking. These are conversations that are meaningful to me. And since we've started talking, I've started thinking through your lens a little bit. And now when kids ask me to write them a letter of recommendation, I tell them to pick one small skill that they're going to choose as a personal goal. Like this is just something I did picturing me as you. And then I have a conversation with them where I'm like, all right, I'll write you the letter of recommendation. I just want you to, in addition to focusing on your education, I want you to focus on one thing that you pick. And I think we're over emphasizing things that we can measure easily. And that's
absolutely. Think of how hindered you are by your curriculum. So in that course, let's say it would be me and another teacher talking and engaging and making kids laugh and having them talk. As soon as I worry about assessment, I'm now going to shorten the length of the dialogue. I'm going to lessen the quality of the teaching in order to make it more egalitarian. So, there needs to be some of that risk taking. You need to get them to think outside the box, without any concern at all for what their opinions are. I don't know. Obviously, I think about this a lot. I really have. I have certain kids that do things in class that are more, I'll say, activist than other kids, and they wear their activism on their sleeve, literally sometimes with patches or words, and I'm so so much do I want to ask them why they believe what they believe. Not to challenge them and not to catch them, but to get them to verbalize it, to question it. And you just, that's taboo. You know, you can't, because we have to worry about whether or not we're putting someone on the spot. But the more you develop a relationship, when I find in that meet the press thing, kids love talking about themselves. They love it. I have difficulty getting 4 volunteers for the first one. And then I have to draw names out of a hat for the second one, because they want to talk about themselves. Even if they're very, very, very quiet kids, very introspective, they like talking about themselves. And what I always say to them is, because it's the only thing in your life that you're the expert on, complete expert, right? And nobody knows better than you is you. What a powerful thing for kids to be able to articulate, because they know themselves better than anybody else on the earth. And for them to be able to express it and then get validated for it. So there's no rules for them, but there are rules for the audience, you know? And it's, I think it's liberating for kids to get them to just talk about themselves. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good skill for adults to practice. Like, if they're not comfortable talking about themselves in front of you, then you're overlooking some aspect of the power relationship that you have over them sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's cool. I'm aware of the fact that we've been going on for over an hour now, and I don't know if people will click on these links if they're an hour and 20 minutes. So I think we should wrap up. Do you got any jokes to tell or final thoughts to leave us with?
No. Nothing.
Okay.
I'll save it for next time. I'll come more prepared with wit and witticisms.
Okay. I hope that inspiring speech that I gave you, which the audience is going to see now, you think about that over the next 2 weeks, Coach.
It's got me reflecting already.
And before we start, I have something to share with you. It's a little bit uncomfortable for me to share with you because it's hard for me to say. And that's that I think everybody who's been watching us so far can tell that I'm carrying the load here, Coach. And I'm going to need you to start pulling your weight around here a little bit more. I need you to be a little bit risky. I need you to be willing to be vulnerable. I need you to be funny. I was driving this weekend and I was thinking, what can I do that would be awkward, that makes me feel more comfortable to start this? And I thought, if I started to talk to Coach Simoes like I was his coach and he was his player, for some reason that terrifies me. That's what I'm trying to do here. Mm-hmm. And then it occurred to me that my first memory of you isn't really from baseball, it's actually from football. And I was thinking that when I was a freshman, you were my junior varsity coach, and we lost our first game to Norton. They crushed us. They played all their seniors, and we probably gained about 6 yards that whole game. And what I remember, and I think everybody that was I think everybody that was on that team remembers the speech that you gave the practice after we lost, because you had us all huddled in a group and you were using that angry tone, and you released the quote of the year, which was 4th and half a pubic hair. And I don't know if you remember that, but that 4th and half a pubic hair is a line that lives on today. And we were not sure if we were supposed to laugh in that moment or not. We did a lot of laughing after, but somehow I think in that speech, you bonded us all as a team, and we went on and won the rest of our games that year. And I was thinking how, you know, you get to be old guys like us and you can say, if I only knew then what I know now. But the truth is, back then we knew a lot of things that we've forgotten from then to now. And so I need you to get back to that 4th and half a pubic hair, Simoes, and I need you to find some of that inner wit of yours. And this is where we steal the audience.
Inappropriate.
That's true. It's going to have to be fourth and half an armpit hair now.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
I'll see what I can do.
I appreciate it.